So great. So we have a check-in of okay, we have pooped. Anybody else have something to add to that? Michael's feeling inspired. Okay, we have somebody else who's feeling pooped. Somebody, Lorna's feeling energized. And we have somebody feeling tired. Well, everything is welcomed. Yeah. Frazzled is good, you're right. Soon to be energized. You're ever optimistic. I'm delighted. So, I'm going to keep my eye on the waiting room and I want to welcome you here today. And I know that it takes a lot of energy and effort and prioritizing to make time like this for yourself. And so the fact that you're here, if you're able to gift yourself with presence, the word presence has present in it. And it's a present when we give ourselves the ability to focus on one thing. Because life certainly is busy, right? Many of us have probably got 2 cell phones. I met somebody recently who has 3. And we're looking at a screen and you've probably got more than just the Zoom call going on. So there's lots happening, right? And that's part of why we're having this conversation. Why potentially this topic actually drew you here. And I know that there is something in here for you. So I'm going to be sharing lots of different ideas, things you may have heard about before. But even if you leave with one thing that you already know, that you're reminded about, could actually help you to better manage your energy, your well-being, your presence, your health, then that is a wonderful takeaway to have. But that's not going to happen if you aren't able to actually be present. So what I invite you to do is, as I start sharing my screen, is perhaps drop your eyes away from the screen so you're not distracted. And wriggle your toes for me. They might be in socks, they might be in shoes, you might be barefoot. But allow yourself to think of your feet, to bring your awareness to your feet. And even if you're watching this recording, I invite you to do that too. And then bring your awareness to your hands. Are they maybe holding something? Are they just relaxing on your lap? Are they on the desk or the table in front of you? And then bring your awareness to your shoulders and your neck and your jaw, this area where we carry a lot of tension. And just notice for now, you don't need to do anything. Often simply by being aware of something, we notice, gosh, that's a bit tight, and then we loosen it a bit. But for now, I'd just like you to become aware of this body that's carried you throughout this day to where you are today. And a lot of us, we spend a lot of time in our heads and we disconnect from our bodies. And our bodies are where we feel stress and where stress originates from. And that's why it's so important to connect with it. So take a deep breath in, and as you exhale, allow yourself to, what do you need to let go of in order to be fully present for the next hour or so? In order to get exactly what you need from now, from today, from the session. And if it's helpful to maybe write that thing down that you need to remember to do later, is there something that's on your mind that's stopping you from being fully present? Now is your opportunity to put that aside just for a short while, because you will come back to it. All right. Welcome. And as I am chatting, I'm going to keep the chat open. If anything comes up and you have a question, pop it into the chat because I'll come back to it. I may not answer it straight away, but I'll use that as a reference. And I will share a thank you note, and I'll include the resources that I'm going to mention in the session with you. And you can always be in touch with me. This can be a light touch topic, but it can also be incredibly deep. And I want you to know that I'm here to help you. If I can't, I will do my best to find the resources that can. So you can always reach out to me. And if you ever feel that you're at a point of real overwhelm and you really need help, please contact your doctor. Because we really are living in incredibly tiring times. I mean, nobody I'm meeting is less busy than they were 10 years ago or 2 years ago. So, and the pace, just before I hit record, we were saying days seem to be too short. And the fact that you're here, I'm going to make the assumption that there's something around burnout as a topic that interests you. And on that note, can I get a thumbs up from anybody? Can you see a big purple slide that says Beyond Burnout? Fantastic. Okay. So When we have lots of energy and we feel inspired, we can do anything, right? It sometimes feels like we can move mountains. But when we feel as if the flame inside us is going out or has gone out, and we feel, for instance, maybe pooped or frazzled more than we'd like to, then everything can feel like a big mountain, right? Even when it's not. And so I think it's important for us to understand context of why this topic is so important. And I love this quote that says, "In the depth of winter, I finally learnt that there was, in me, an invincible summer." Now, for most of us, I know some of us might be in the Southern Hemisphere watching this, but for most of us, we're now going into winter, which is the darker months where things tend to slow down and perhaps we struggle a bit more with our health and well-being. But also it's symbolic of when we go through, like we have, incredibly challenging times, such as global pandemics and lockdowns and the amount of uncertainty and change never ever seen or experienced by our generation at least. And it's in those times that we can potentially find parts of ourselves and learn about our ability to bounce back and be resilient. But that isn't easy. And I'm not here to say that we're always going to make things amazing. I certainly have learned this year that it is okay to feel tired and burnt out. And in fact, it's probably something that's going to become very common for all of us. I feel the opportunity is in trying to catch ourselves a bit sooner before we get to a point where we're in the depth of winter, or it all feels too dark and heavy, or we feel as if potentially there's less hope. And so today I've planned a bit of a menu, but I do not want you to leave here with indigestion. So I don't want you to leave with a whole bunch of things that you feel like you can do differently. I am promising you lots of different takeaways. So what might be helpful is to have pen and paper handy and make some notes. Because even though the session is recorded and I'll share the recording with you. However, I know myself, I sometimes have the best of intentions and I intend to go back to watch things and I don't always do that. That said, I do know, Michael, I hope you don't mind me sharing this, you are the one person that really watches recordings of things. So I really do honor you about that. But when you hear something that I say or you get a feeling, that feeling comes from your inner wisdom, your intuition. So listen to that and write down a note. Because if that's the one thing that you pledge at the end of the session to take back with you, to put into action, that is enough. That really is. Because this is about easy, bite-sized bits of information that we can bring into our already very busy lifestyles and just gently keep our flame going. And like I mentioned, if you ever feel, this is not medical advice. A lot of the things we talk about around well-being relates to our health. However, if you're really feeling any of the symptoms to an extreme level, or you can't manage it on your own, reach out to me or to your doctor. Right, so my intention for today is to leave you at the end of the session with at least one practical thing that you can take away that can help you to better manage your energy, to better manage your health overall, so that you feel as if you've got this inner sense of summer as opposed to maybe a lingering dark winter. And it's an opportunity to connect and have a bit of playful time with yourself, because you've probably had back-to-back Teams and Zoom calls and client calls, or you've been at a conference, and we don't often gift ourselves this gift of paying attention to our well-being. And so this is a wonderful opportunity to be able to do that and to connect with each other, because there's a reason why we're here together. And although I have a lot of ideas, I don't have all the answers for everything. So please feel free to also share some of your experiences, because there's a wisdom in the collective. And like I always say, this journey of well-being is not a destination. We don't get somewhere. We go on a path, right? And so even someone like me, there's no point where, well, that's it, I'm perfectly healthy now, I'm never going to get burnout or never have a health condition. It's something we always have to do. And there's so much around driving that we can't control. So there might be diversions in traffic and traffic jams, or you may have something go wrong with your car. You can't always control those things. What you can choose is, do you grip the steering wheel and grit your teeth and tighten your shoulders and get upset with yourself and criticize and be mad at traffic and everything else? Or do you choose to stay as calm as possible keeping connected to your body, keeping a bit of curiosity going and asking yourself helpful, conscious questions. We're going to talk about that, and I'm going to give you some ideas. And stay as relaxed as possible so that when you get through the traffic jam or you deal with the breakdown or you get to where you need to be, you arrive in a much more wholehearted place and state rather than wound up with depleted energy. So I'm going to give you a bit of a sat-nav guide as to how you can make this journey of life a little bit easier, knowing that there's still a lot that we can't change. That the one thing we know is that everything is uncertain, right? And I'm delighted that you've chosen this time today, or by watching the recording, by giving you a bit of a pit stop. It's like going on a 4-hour drive. It's not wise to drive the whole time without stopping. We've seen those signs on the motorways. Tiredness kills, take a break. And so you're taking a break to connect with you. And that deserves a pat on the back. In fact, here's an opportunity to do, this is a technique that you can use if you ever feel like you are a little bit disassociated because of anxiety or stress, is to actually pat your body. So I invite you to try this now, is tap the back of your shoulders and then just the top of your arms. And you can use a firm tap or a gentle tap. And notice how that feels as your hands connect to your flesh. And some of the ideas that I'm going to share with you might feel a little bit strange, but you never know until you try something if it's something that your body might respond to. Like, for instance, one of my health coaches gave me a technique called Rattle and Roll. And so at night she said, I want you to rattle, and in the morning I want you to roll. So by rattle, she means before I get into bed for about 60 seconds, she said, I just need to rattle my body and shake as if I'm shaking off tension. And then in the morning when I wake up, to gently roll so that I wake up my body. And I thought this was quite strange, but I've been doing it for the last week. And you know what? It actually works. But I wouldn't have known that if I didn't actually give it a try. So one of the techniques or aspects I'm going to share with you today is the importance of being curious. And curiosity is having that childlike wonder of, could this work? Or that's something new. I wonder what that's like. And so I invite you to stay curious and to allow your body to actually let you know when something works for it or not, because we're all so unique. And on the topic of being unique, when we speak about burnout, it really is a spectrum, right? So some people can feel burnt out at a point where much sooner than somebody else. And it's got a lot to do with our threshold. And in a moment, I'm going to share with you a concept that speaks about threshold and how potentially we can make that threshold bigger so we have more of bandwidth in order to take on what life brings to us. But when we talk about burnout, and I have experience with this myself, I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, do too. It can, the final point of burnout really is where we have almost organ failure and where a person would be hospitalized because they're so burnt out that they can't even produce the hormones that they need to actually sustain a healthy living body. We definitely don't want to get to that point. And so it means being aware of your body, and not only being aware, but having different techniques in order to shift things. And I wrote a blog recently titled, What the Flux is Going On? Because I was feeling like as we were coming out of the second lockdown, and I started doing things that I used to do before COVID arrived on the scene and took up center stage. And it was surprising to me that actually sometimes I wasn't enjoying them. Like, for instance, I enjoy salsa dancing. I also love going out to dinner with friends. But in the beginning, I actually was exhausted after doing either one of those things. And then I started reading about this term coined by a lady called Amy Cuddy. And she wrote about it in an article published in the Washington Post called Post-Pandemic Flux Syndrome. Big mouthful. But basically, what we're seeing in all of us is that we are coming out of this pandemic, and we're not even coming out of it, right? There's some places, like Austria and Belgium, and I was in South Africa 2 weeks ago, where there's potentially more waves coming in, so more lockdowns and more restrictions, and so there's no real ending and new beginning of life, but yet many of us want to get back to as life was, potentially. And so it can seem quite confusing. And so I want you to know that it's really okay to be not feeling okay. And it's okay to potentially feel differently about the same things at different times. If there was ever a time for compassion and empathy for yourself, it is now. Perhaps, can I just ask for a show of hands if anybody is resonating with any of what I'm saying around this flux, experiencing ups and downs? Yeah. Okay, great. Perhaps what I will do is also share the link to the blog post that I wrote about. So if you'd like to maybe go and read a bit more about that, you can. And when we... Actually, I've got here, because I wanted to light this, I've got a candle and some matches. And when we light a match, we get this kind of initial burst, right, of a flame. And then it can go out. And also a match at some point will burn out if we don't give it something else to feed off. That flame needs fuel. And so today is more about how do you make sure that you've got not just a match that you light. Let me not set off the smoke alarm. That would not be good for a Zoom call. You want to be able to light a candle within yourself. That's a bit of a slow burn that lasts for long and sustains itself. And to be able to do that, I'm actually going to leave this candle here. I sometimes do this. I sometimes, for different types of workshops, and this may be an idea that you use, or activities, put something in my line of sight that reminds me what I'm doing. So for instance, when I travel, I've got a pendant of an elephant that I always wear, because the elephant for me is symbolic of an animal that is wise and present and grounded. I've also got, if some of you have been on some of my calls, you would have met my colorful elephant that a 6-year-old neighbor made for me, that I keep sometimes in sight when I know that I want to feel a little bit playful. So having, and I've spoken about this before with some of you, around joy spotting, especially the area that we work in. Have you got things around you that make you feel good or inspire you? Because inspiration is part of the solution to managing burnout. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to describe 3 different ways of being. So you might have fluxed and changed between these 3. And I'd like you to think about, if you reflect, let's use the last month or so. So let's say from about the beginning of October to now, so the last 4 to 6 weeks. Have you felt hyper aroused? And in that sense, I mean as if you had very high energy, potentially maybe even too high. So you felt a bit like this very alert squirrel. We can call him maybe suspicious squirrel. And I'm going to name some of the feelings that this state refers to. And this happens when we are potentially stressed, and you might have heard of the fight or flight response. So as I mention these words, think about as a percentage, or if you think of the last month, how often, and roughly, we don't need to be super analytical here, but just get a feel for how often have you felt some anxiety, impulsivity, intense reactions. So Brené Brown refers to intense reactions as chandeliering. When something happens and you jump up as if you're jumping up to the chandelier, like you overreact for the situation. I had that happen to me recently where I heard a noise and I got such a big fright. And I was like, but the noise it shouldn't have caused that kind of response. But I had been quite tired and had something on my mind. So I knew that potentially I was really hyper aroused. So, and how often in the last month have you felt perhaps some tension and tightness and the inability to relax? Maybe you've even felt some shaking and trembling as if you've maybe had too much caffeine. Have you experienced addictive type behavior, perhaps around food or like binge watching Netflix? Obsessive thinking, maybe obsessive behavior. How much over the last month have you maybe had an emotional outburst where you've maybe been more reactive than you've wanted to? So maybe said something that you regretted, or like almost like a sense of chaos, or maybe you've had racing thoughts. And how often have you maybe experienced some anger or rage or some aggression? And defensiveness would also fall into this bracket. Now, you don't need to share that with anybody, but I'd like you to just think, did any of that resonate with you? And if it did, I'm going to come back to this and we're going to talk about techniques that can help you when you're feeling angry, overreactive, caught in an addictive type cycle, intense feeling, or chandeliering, for instance. So it's a bit like being a volcano that's erupting. And as we move on, I invite you to take a deep breath in, noticing how that feels. Can you breathe in easily, or is there maybe some tension as you breathe in? And staying curious about that. And then exhale. And now I'd like you to think about, as a percentage of the last month or so, the last 4 to 6 weeks, if you think about this type of feeling, so this is more of a, if you look at the panda bear, let's call him or her pausing panda. So in this sense, you're feeling not hyper aroused, but more hypo aroused in terms of an emotional state. So this would be the opposite of hyper arousal or hyper alertness. This is where perhaps you're feeling things such as being numb, or like you actually don't know what you feel. There's an absolute disconnection from feeling. You feel disconnected from yourself, perhaps disconnected from others. You may have some memory loss where you can't remember things. You find that you struggle to think. Your general memory, like you misplace things, or you get somewhere and you're like, I actually don't remember how I drove here or got here, or you walk into the kitchen and you're like, what did I come here for? You feel so tired that you almost can't move, like you just want to be lying on a branch like that panda is. Like you can't, it feels like so much effort to even lift a finger. You may have decreased reactions where when you're meant to be angry or upset, you aren't. Maybe you feel some feelings like shame. And as opposed to anxiety, in this state, you're more likely to feel a sense of depression. And you may feel like you can't defend yourself. You can't say no. And shut down would be a word that a lot of us would use. So once again, without sharing this, just reflect on, out of those two states that I've just described, is there one maybe that you feel more of than the other? So do you generally feel more hyper-aroused, or do you generally feel more suspicious squirrel, or more pausing panda? Or is it maybe equal between the two? And all of that is really good information. And what I've just read off, by the way, is a worksheet that I will share with you in the thank you note. It's a 1-page that goes through these different symptoms and can help you identify with which state you might be spending more time in. And as a third state, so if you think of a calm, wide, peaceful river that gently meanders, so here, this is when you're feeling a bit like a cool cat. So, you might be rested and you've got one eye closed, but you've also got one eye open. So you're alert, but not hyper alert. You're calm, but you're not so calm that you're feeling sleepy and disengaged. So when you're in this state, you're feeling balanced. You have a calm state of mind. You're in control. You're grounded. You're alert and present. You're able to feel empathy and compassion, and you're incredibly present and resourced. So if something comes along, you're able to respond appropriately. How much time in the last 4 to 6 weeks have you felt like this cool cat? So the journey I've just taken you on, And I'm hoping that by bringing in some little creatures, I make this less scientific and more approachable. What I've taken you through is the stress response, or what we sometimes refer to as the window of tolerance. So the window of tolerance is each of us has got a certain bandwidth. It's a bit like Wi-Fi. We've got this bandwidth of how we can connect. And when we're in a healthy, optimal bandwidth, when we're feeling like the cool cat, that is when we can deal with stress from everyday life. Because it really is okay to get angry. What's not okay is when we overreact to a particular situation, or we don't react when we're supposed to. And being able to understand and identify and have different techniques to help us to stay within the zone and to float down this like wide river gently rather than hyper-reacting or completely shutting off can really help us in terms of managing the uncertainty that life brings us. So if you think of your window of tolerance, perhaps in the chat, either give me a more or a less. Would you say that your window of tolerance, your ability to manage stress, is more compared to what it was before COVID, or less? So I invite you to pop that into the chat. Wonderful. So if somebody says that window of tolerance is more, so it's over the past 18 months, it's increased. Wonderful. Michael, more. More. I'm delighted to see that. Anybody perhaps feeling like it's less? And why this is helpful is when we know what to look out for. So if you've got a wide window of tolerance, that's wonderful because that makes you more resilient, better able to avoiding things like burnout. Because what leads us to burnout is when we're out of the zone of healthy bandwidth, or this window of tolerance, when we're hyper vigilant, because that's energy depleting, and when we're hypo, we end up also losing energy. So both are not good. Thank you for the sharing. So those of you that have a car that when you park, you sometimes have that indicator that makes a noise to help you when you're reversing, and when you're going backwards, you might hear beep, 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 beep. And at one point, that at some point you've got to stop and pay attention. Otherwise, you might just crash and hurt your car. Or maybe when you're moving forward, it might make a different sound, like bop, 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 bop. And you've got to pay attention to that too. You really have a problem though if you're hearing beep and bop at the same time. That might mean that you're going backwards and forwards, which is not possible. So we don't want that. In which case, just stop what you're doing and take 3 deep breaths. But these warning signs, whether we're moving forwards or backwards, so we're hyper alerted or hypo, are important. And they might change because remember, we're in this flux. We're in a time where we've had the most uncertainty and change ever. And some of us clearly have responded well and we're potentially learning from it. And some of us might not be. And there's somebody close to you that may not be. So the more we are resourced, the more we are also able to help those around us. So why does this happen? Why do we move into the hypervigilant state, or why do we potentially disengage and lose energy? Everything comes down to the fact that we have built inside us a primal stress response. So if we are chased by a wild-toothed tiger or a hippopotamus or an elephant, I have been chased by an elephant before because, as some of you know, I grew up in South Africa. So as a young child, we used to often go to a place called Makutsi, just outside the Kruger National Park. And my parents, being French, did not grow up with safaris, and they loved going to wildlife parks. And they particularly liked elephants. That's probably why I have a love for elephants. That's where it started from. And we would often get a bit too close with the car. And we have had some, I don't want to say near-death experiences, but we have been chased by angry elephants. But whether you've been chased by angry elephants or you've been chased by your boss or a client that annoys you or tech that doesn't work, or in my case, that might be Microsoft Teams, like this afternoon, it happened again. My screen just wouldn't share, even though it always shares. And I noticed that the stress response is the same, whether it's a wild animal or a perceived threat or some kind of technology challenge. What happens in your brain the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, which is this almond-shaped gland at the back of your head. For something so small, gosh, it can create a lot of havoc. It sends a message down to your adrenal glands, which are also tiny. They're the size of walnuts. They sit on top of your kidneys, and within a millisecond, you can't even measure it, it's so fast, your adrenal glands will release adrenaline. They also release about 50 other corticosteroids that prepare you for the stress response. So they get your heart rate going, your blood flowing. That prepares you to fight, to deal with the stressor, or to run away. Digestion slows down because, once again, it's not important for you to digest your lunch if potentially your life is at risk. Your thinking changes immediately. It's not necessary for you to have a major a sense of humor or big picture thinking or problem solving ability when you need to find one tree to run up to save your life. And so we become very focused in our attention, and the whole body constricts. Every single system gets impacted by the stress response. We are having the stress response happen to us all the time. Some of us are waking up in the morning, we're reaching for our phones, maybe even before we have been to the bathroom and had a cup of tea. So we start engaging with WhatsApp or Telegram or Signal. We might look at an email or two. We might check the news. We go onto social media. We check Instagram. We don't know what we're going to see. We might see something that annoys us, or we might even get into an argument. And all this has happened before 8 a.m. I haven't even mentioned the fact that we have families and children and responsibilities and team players and colleagues that might want and need us. And so we start putting out all these fires. And then we have back-to-back meetings, and we have 3 cups of coffee, and maybe we forget to hydrate, or we don't have a healthy lunch. And then it's no wonder that by 3 o'clock in the afternoon, our system's feeling a bit frazzled, and we may go into this hyper-vigilant state, or your brain just decides, I just can't, and you just feel heavy and sluggish, like you just can't go on. So it's important to realize that stress impacts everything in our system. And we can't get away from it. What we can do is find ways to help our body physically, because the stress response starts in the body because of the releasing of adrenaline and cortisol. We need to find ways to help our heart, to better manage our emotions so that we don't get hijacked all the time. And we can stay responsive rather than reactive. That we can manage this incredible universe that sits on our shoulders so that we can problem solve and keep big picture thinking and keep a sense of humor and remember things. And that we can keep a sense of connected to spirit or purpose or meaning. Because often when we have burnout, one of the defining factors of burnout is the sense of cynicism, of loss of connection with meaning and purpose. And so this is a bit of the problem, right, and the challenge. So let's get into, okay, we understand there's a challenge here. You wouldn't be here if perhaps you weren't feeling challenged. What can you do about it? So what do you see on the screen? Pop that into the chat, or feel free to unmute yourself. What do you see? Okay, we have ice. Anybody see anything else? Ice blocks? Ice cubes? Anybody else see anything else? So we're talking about burnout, which often makes me think of the word burn makes me think of fire. And I think one of the fastest ways to put out fire is to use water, right? And also, if we speak about putting ice on something, we cool it down. And ice is the problem, but ice is also the solution. Because what does ice stand for? In case of emergency. I'm sure some of you in your cell phones or your mobile phones have maybe even got an ice contact, right? And the good news is ice or ice cubes or melting water, whatever it is that you see when you look at the screen is the same thing. It's H2O. It's just in a different state. So there's been a little change, but it's not a different chemical. It's the same thing. And so you do not need to change you. You are perfectly perfect as you are in your imperfections. What you need to do potentially to better manage burnout is to be able to manage your state. That means having techniques like the ones that we're going to talk about that I've already shared, like using your breath or coming down and being present in the body, or using techniques like patting or rattling and rolling in order to help you better manage your state. Because sometimes we want ice, but if you're really thirsty, you don't want ice, right? You want melted ice cubes so you can drink it. Sometimes, like me, you want to put a bottle of champagne on ice. Some of you know how much I like champagne. So we need to be able to change our state, but you don't need to change you. Each of us, as long as you know your bandwidth, your window of tolerance, what happens when you move out of that zone, and you've got ways to help you keep in that optimal zone, so you're more like a cool cat and you can meander and take on whatever comes and flow through life, because we know when that bandwidth or the river becomes squeezed in and narrow. If any of you have done any kind of kayaking or been down a river or watched a river, when it becomes narrow, it gets turbulent and rushes. We don't want that. We want to be able to have it wide. The wider your window of tolerance, the better. So you're better able to cope. And why did I say ice is the problem and ice is the solution? Because the definition of burnout by the World Health Organization is when we feel a sense of ineffectiveness, cynicism, and exhaustion. So these are big words. What this means, and perhaps you can ask, well, I'm going to ask the question, and I'd like you to answer these. In the past, say, month or so, have you felt a decreasing ability in effectiveness or productivity at work or at home? And this you can answer to yourself. So ineffectiveness means feeling like nothing you're doing is making a difference, that you're not accomplishing things, that you're not getting things done. And maybe that could be actually, yeah, I am feeling that, but it's about a 5 out of 10. Or maybe for you it's a 10 out of 10. Or maybe you're feeling the most productive ever and you're getting things done. And so it's a 1 out of 10. Then in terms of cynicism, this is a sense of being disconnected, not being able to feel empathy or compassion for yourself or for others. So how would you answer this question? Over the past month or so, I feel an increasing sense of being cut off from myself and others. Many things that used to feel good no longer bring me pleasure. So often when we move down the burnout spectrum, things that used to give us pleasure, be that food, it could be sexual intimacy, it could be spending time with loved ones, it could be salsa dancing, for instance, for me, when we no longer derive joy from those things, and often that's related to the fact that we're feeling exhausted. And that's the third component of burnout. And often the emotional exhaustion especially comes from caring too much for too long. So if you reflect on the last month, how would you answer this question? I am mentally, emotionally, and physically exhausted, and it isn't alleviated by sleeping. So being aware of these things can sometimes bring up emotion in us. Welcome that. Don't judge it. Don't suppress it. What we suppress, the body will express. So allow it to be. Being able to sit with discomfort is one of the skills of being more resilient, of being better able to manage our states, better able to manage burnout. So when we pull these three things together, this ice, ineffectiveness, cynicism, and exhaustion, that's potentially when you have all three of them happening at the same time, that's when you can start feeling burnout. And like I said, it's very hard to say exactly when a person has burnout. And depending on your threshold, your window of tolerance, this can change. You know, some of us experience burnout regularly. Some of us might have it only once in our lives, and we learn from that. It's important for us to be able to manage ourselves, but also to be empathetic about those around us. So if you're able to manage your edges and your capacity and you keep your riverbed wide, being able to notice when a colleague or an employee or somebody you care about, maybe a child or a partner, a friend, when you're noticing cynicism in them, or when they're so exhausted and they're telling you, like, I'm not going out on the weekends, I don't want to see anybody, I'm just watching Netflix, but I'm still exhausted on a Monday, you can be like, hang on, maybe they're moving too close to their edges of burnout. So having a checklist, having things that we can go to help us is important. It's a bit like having a first aid kit. In an emergency, have you got the band-aids and the plasters and the antiseptic creams and things? So, I said that ice is the problem and it's also the solution. So what is the solution? Well, let's take ice and let's change it into something else. So instead of feeling ineffective, we want to try and feel inspired. We want to try and feel inspired. What has inspired you recently? And now I'd like you to share in the chat if anything comes to mind and you're happy to share that. What has inspired you recently? Is there anything that has caused you to feel inspired? And different things will cause us to feel different senses of inspiration. I went for a walk at midday today and I was inspired by the colors of the leaves on the trees. So we have another element from nature that's been inspirational for someone. Oh, no. I just looked down and I saw Emma's comment, water. Anybody want to share what has, or when have you felt inspired recently? Perhaps you've watched a movie or seen something or somebody's done something nice for you. Oh, there we go, watching Strictly and Bake Off each week. I like that you mentioned each week, so at least we know you're getting weekly inspiration. I'm hoping that we can get to a point where each of us can have daily inspiration. Because daily, we're feeling stress, right? So daily, we need to be able to have techniques to help us better manage that. And I am curious about the fact that we haven't had lots of input around inspiration. So when I share some ideas, maybe that's where you could pay a little bit of attention. All right, so the second part of the solution around ice is instead of being cynical, being more curious. And I've spoken about curiosity already. There's many ways to be curious. I'm going to share one way that I have been using that has helped me a lot, especially through the past 8 to 18 months. Anybody want to take a guess what exhaustion would change to? What would be a solution for exhaustion? Absolutely, yes, energized. So instead of feeling exhausted, how do we better manage our energy? And sometimes it's not about being buzzing and alert, because remember, you can be too buzzing and too alert. You can get into the hyper stage, but it's about being able to have the right amount of energy for the right thing, a bit like a hot air balloon. Hot air balloons need a burst of flame to lift themselves and go up. But if they go too high, then they're not going to come back down. They need to be able to take down that flame and then drop, perhaps even landing right onto the ground. Like when we go to bed at night, we want our energy to come down, right? When we wake up in the morning or before a 4 o'clock call where we might need to present something important, like I have to do today, we want our energy to be just right. So when we combine these three things, this is my blueprint. And there are other ways to manage burnout. I'm not saying this is the panacea for everything. But the more I work with this tool, the more powerful I realize it is. So if you've got 1 or 2 techniques that can help you manage your inspiration, your curiosity, and your energy, you could potentially avoid burnout. I'm not saying you will completely, but you can certainly feel very resourced. So let's look at each of those 3, and I'm going to share some practical ideas. And at most, I want you to leave here with maybe 1 for each area that you could experiment with. But I know that if you're here, you could potentially be feeling burnt out and tired, and sometimes 3 is too much. So you can write 3 things down and put them up somewhere, but commit to trying 1. It's better to do 1 thing and be consistent at it than to try too many things and then after a day or 2 or a week, stop. It's a bit like going to the gym and then training too hard, or going for like a 10-mile walk when you haven't walked in a long time, and then you're so stiff the next day you can hardly stand up or sit on the toilet. So let's start with inspiration. Inspiration, because I asked that question and I was surprised that there was only 1 quick share in the chat, unless you're being distracted with other screens, which I appreciate can be happening. So what inspires you? What inspires you? I actually have an inspiration board. This is not my board. Actually, I just realized I should have used my board as a picture. I'll do that next time. But I've got a joy board, a vision board of things that I'd like more of in my life. And I've got that behind the door by my kitchen. And not every day do I notice it, but the days that I know that I need to just remind myself, I'll take a look at it and I'll spot some things on there. And on its most, well, what inspires us is anything that makes you feel happy, joy, presence, grounded, calm, purposeful, and generally things that make us feel inspired are people that we care about. So social connection, nature often does when we spend time connecting with nature and the elements. Laughter makes us feel inspired. So what makes you laugh? Have you laughed in the last 24 hours? Yes or no in the chat? Who's had not just a giggle or a chuckle? Who's had a belly laugh in the last 24 hours? I'm trying to think if I have. I did on Monday evening. But today's Wednesday, so that was 48 hours ago. No, okay. Because so when things make you laugh, those are things potentially that can inspire you. So maybe it's watching comedy. Great, Lorna, that you've had that. Maybe it's the connection with the person. So get more of that. And then also creative expression can inspire us. Is anybody using creativity at the moment, like a hobby or painting or reading outside of work-related stuff, maybe doing gardening? You know, there's this beautiful expression, I'll pop it into the chat that I often share. Take your tired heart and turn it into art. Because any form of art, be it listening to music, creating music, reading, poetry, gardening, cooking can be a form of art. Actually doing things like doodling or drawing can help us to forget about the logical, analytical left brain and process emotions and feel our bodies. So if you've got young kids and you play with them, that's also potentially a source of inspiration. And wonderful, wonderful that you're reading before going to bed. I would like you to read something that perhaps does calm you for sure. But hey, if it's set on history, because I'm guessing that WW2 is, what is that, World War II, maybe? Yeah, okay. Yeah, notice how your body feels. And if it's helping you fall asleep and wake up feeling rested, great. If not, experiment with other forms of things to read or to listen to. And on a most basic level, what does the word inspire or inspiration, I just gave it away. Inspiration has inspire in it. And to inspire means to breathe in. We inspire, we inhale, and we expire or exhale. In fact, the last time we exhale is when we really expire, we die. And when we inspire and come into this world, the first thing we do is inhale. The breath is what we have at the very beginning of our lives and the very end of our lives. And when we don't breathe correctly, we potentially can get burnout, because just like this candle, if I suffocate it and take all the oxygen away, it's going to go out. If I blow forcefully on it, loads of oxygen, it's going to also go out. So we need the right amount of oxygen to stay at the right flame. And how is your oxygen? How is your breathing? Have you got breathing techniques as part of your toolkit to help you? Because when you're feeling, most of us are feeling hyper-aroused. We're feeling more of a sense of anxiety and switched on and constantly connected. And in which case, what helps is to breathe in slowly and deeply. And there's many different breathing techniques. There's box breathing, there's body scan breathing, there's rhythmic breathing, there's imagery-based breathing. In fact, let's try one breathing technique together now. Let's do the box breathing technique, which is where we breathe in. So we inspire, we hold our breath, we expire, and we hold our breath. And let's do it for the count of 4, 4, 4, 4. So we're going to breathe in for 4, hold for 4, breathe out for 4, and hold for 4 before we breathe in again. And let's do 4 rounds. What I invite you to do is notice how you feel now. So bring your awareness to your breath, to your chest. Notice your body and your mind. And then we're going to do a check-in afterwards. If you're familiar with breathing techniques, and maybe you have a regular mindfulness practice, and you can do 5, 5, 5, or you can do 6, 6, 6, you get the idea, or you can build it up to 8, 8, 8, great. But let's start with 4. The idea is to keep the inhale and the exhale exactly the same. A lot of the military and police force actually use this breathing technique in order to stay calm in very intense situations. So if you want to create calm in the chaos, you want to come down from that hypervigilant state, it's very helpful to regulate your inhale and exhale. So are you ready? I invite you to take a deep breath in for 4, 3, 2, 1, and hold your breath for 4, 3, 2, 1, and exhale 4, 3, 2, 1. Hold. This one might be a little bit difficult, but hold your breath. And then let's repeat. Inhale 4, 3, 2, 1. Hold 4, 3, 2, 1. Exhale 4, 3, 2, 1. Hold 4, 3, 2, 1. 2 more rounds. Breathe in deeply into your belly. Hold your breath. And exhale. And hold for 4, 3, 2, 1. And last time, breathe in for 4. Hold. Exhale. And hold. And you can either continue the breath or allow your breath to slowly come back to how it wants to be. But notice how you feel now. That was less than 2 minutes of regulated breathing. Even though I was facilitating it, so not really doing the breath, I feel calmer. Yeah, thank you, Roxine. You feel more relaxed. I want to mention that when you're feeling anxious and you sit still for too long, you can actually create more anxiety. So rather start with 2 to 5 minutes of short bursts of deep breathing, rather than sitting for like 15 or 20 minutes, because people tell you that you need to meditate with your legs crossed and your hands up and going, and then you're feeling so anxious because you can't, like, your thoughts are all over the show. The fact that you're actually noticing your thoughts is amazing. You're more than halfway there. That is what mindfulness is about. It's about being mindful of your mind. We're not meant to empty our minds and stop thinking. We're just meant to actually notice them, because if we don't notice them, they can take control over us. So lovely that you've experienced that feeling that your shoulders have dropped and you feel less tight. And that was in 4 rounds of breath. So you've always got your breath at your disposal. And imagine if you stay curious about your breath, how you can then extrapolate that to other parts of your life. Because now, as we move into the second component of this blueprint for burnout, that is curiosity. So what does curiosity mean to you? Are you curious as a person? Would you like to be more curious? I'm generally quite a curious person. I know that as a child I used to drive my parents crazy because I would always say why. And when they gave me an answer, like why is the sky blue? I'd say why to that answer and why again. And why curiosity is helpful is, especially when we are stressed. Remember, the stress response shuts down parts of the brain. So you can have what I call a lizard hijack wizard moment. The back of the brain, that amygdala, that walnut, that little almond that then causes the stress reaction of fight or flight, freeze and fold. it wants you to just focus on the stress, to save you, to help you survive. It's a natural response to get you to not potentially die from the tiger that's coming at you, because that part of your brain does not know that Teams is not a tiger. You're still having the same response to it. And staying curious can help us just keep connected to the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that can help us keep open-minded. And curiosity is fun, right? I mean, when I think of curiosity, I think of Alice in Wonderland. If there was ever a character that was maybe curious, it's her, right? So, are you curious? And have you got techniques or ways to help you stay curious, especially when you're feeling stressed? And one way to do this is, even if you're just curious about what inspires you, that's enough. Or maybe you can just be curious about your breath and how you can use that. That's enough. If you're already doing that, then maybe the technique of having conscious questions can help. Now, what do I mean by conscious questions? So conscious questions are when you catch yourself, I'm starting to go down the stress cycle, and you ask yourself a question that can help you go back into that window of tolerance rather than dropping into the I don't care about anything, or the so reactive that you actually like a Red Bull, or you're like a red flag to a bull or a volcano, and once a volcano starts going, it just erupts. So here are some what I call conscious questions that help me reframe situations. I'm going to share a few with you. I would like you to notice if your body, if you actually lean forward, or if you get that little feeling from your intuition in your gut, that you like a question, and that's the one that you write down. Don't write them all down. Just choose one. And if none of them appeal to you, can you come up with your own? So here, for instance, is one that I probably don't use often enough. In fact, maybe think of a stressful situation right now. Something that you would say is about a 5 or 6 out of 10 that's causing you some stress. And let's see which of these questions you feel, okay, that actually has helped me think of a situation and something that I might not have thought about. So think of something that is causing you a challenge or stress at the moment, not something as 10 out of 10, because that might just be too much for us to manage in the context of this consultation. If we were together one-on-one, I'd say sure, but we aren't. So let's choose something moderate. Have you got something? Now ask yourself this question about your situation or your challenge. What makes me strong and capable in this situation? Because remember, inside us, we've got that eternal summer, even though we go through a winter. And we've often been through similar situations, but we forget because we're in that state of panic, that fight or flight or freeze and fold. Here's another question. Where am I making things more complex than they need to be? Because some of us tend to catastrophize when we go into the stress cycle. What would this look like if it were easy? I often ask myself that question, is when I'm stuck in something or I have a challenge, I ask myself, what if this was easy? And then sometimes I think of a person that would maybe potentially help me solve it. That's how these questions can help. Here's something important, because we get stuck in a rut and we get caught up in our comfort zones. What if I did the opposite of what I usually do? I did this today. I found myself feeling a bit anxious because I had a few deadlines, and my heart rate was going. So I noticed my body going into the stress response, and I asked myself, what if I do the opposite of what I usually do? Now, what I usually do is work through things. I grit my teeth and I just push through. What I did, which was the opposite, is I gave myself a 1.5 hour lunch break, but I went for a walk. That's when I noticed the colors on the leaves. And I haven't been to my woods in a long time. And I came back, and I would not be presenting as calmly and groundedly as I am now if I had worked through and just gritted my teeth. And I'm going to get through what I need to. So sometimes we need to do the opposite of what we usually do. So maybe going to bed at 8 p.m. instead of midnight. What if you did that? Would that help the situation? This is thinking out the box. This is what curiosity does. This is a very good question. I often ask myself this in the morning, at the start of my day, to start strong. What am I doing today to feel the way I want to feel? Many of us have got to-do lists. Have you got a to-feel list? So as you're getting stuff done and you're showing up for meetings and doing work and being an adult, a responsible adult, are you also thinking about how you want to feel? Do you want to feel calm? Do you want to feel energized? Do you want to feel curious? Do you want to feel inspired? Do you want to feel joyous? Do you want to feel grateful? Do you want to feel assertive? You know, we are human beings, not human doings. We do well, but not all of us feel and be well. So thinking about how you want to feel. How's this for a random question that I decided just to throw in? Because this can help you with inspiration. If you could only work for 4 hours a day, what would you do in those 4 hours? And why I'm asking that question is if you manage to answer that, if you could only do your work for 4 hours a day, what would you do? You might realize that you need some boundaries to be able to let go of the non-essential stuff to help create time for more balance. So feel free to take one of these questions as your own and try it out. Or to be curious about what question, because if you have too many, then you don't use them. I have the 1 or 2 that I use, and then I remind myself at moments like this that actually there's another question that I could be doing. And now as we shift into the third component, which is energy, I invite you to take a deep breath in. How is your breath? We were just speaking about breath a moment ago, but did you stay in that space of slow, deep, rhythmic breathing? Because when we're tired, it's not always about having a break or going on holiday. Sometimes it's about feeling more connected to our hearts, so doing things that make us feel good, and it's about managing our energy more effectively. So, as I mentioned with the window of tolerance, we can sometimes be in the hyperreactive stage or the hypo stage. I've noticed I'm spending more time in the hypo stage. I'm having more, and I'm sure that's got to do with the seasons changing and the fact that it's been a long year. And so I've been going to bed earlier, and I've actually said no to some social engagement. So there's times where I need to lift my energy. And so when you're in those moments, those times where you feel like symbolically you want to go up in the hot air balloon. So maybe you're feeling flat, tired, uninspired, and you don't just want to go to bed because it's not 9 p.m. or 10 p.m. Have you got things that you can pull out of your first aid kit, so to speak, to help you? And especially in case of emergencies. So I'm going to mention a couple of techniques. I'm by no means saying that all these things should work for you, but maybe one of them could be something that you could take, or maybe you've got your own idea. Here's a few things that I sometimes use. When I need to lift my energy, doing some kind of brisk walk or any kind of brisk exercise, because exercise makes you breathe, right? And you produce endorphins, which makes you feel good. Or perhaps just breathing a bit faster. So this is the opposite, right, of calming yourself down. You start taking much more of an inhale. And there's many different breathing techniques, like in some forms of yoga, they do something called the fire breath, where you pant really quickly, and that energizes you quite fast. In fact, I just took 3 deep breaths like that, and I could feel a rush going up to my brain. Maybe you've got a friend that you know, or they know that when you call them and you're saying, I need an energy lift, that you uplift each other. I've got a friend like that called Shelley, and we call each other when we need to go up or down. We don't fix problems or solutions. We just hear the other person and create a space for them. Going into nature can do both. I mean, it can lift our spirits and it can soothe us. Nature really is a food group. I hope that you have the nutrients of nature every day in your life. Even if it is as simple as listening to birds or looking at a tree outside a window, but if you can immerse yourself, going for an actual walk in a park or sitting on the ground, because every day we have stress, so every day we have a need for some kind of nature or some kind of soothing element. I hope that you can do that. Then remember, there's music, And dancing can often enliven us. Singing, if that's your jam, and if it's not, please be curious about trying it out. Remember what I said about curiosity? I'm very self-conscious about singing, but I know that when I do sing, especially when I'm on my own, like even now, the thought of singing makes me smile from a place that's really authentic. Oh, and then I didn't even know this was coming up, but if you want to laugh, sometimes you can fake it till you make it. There's those yoga classes called laughter yoga that you pretend to be laughing, and then at the end of it, you're actually laughing so hard that there's tears coming out of your eyes. And that's where it can be helpful to actually watch comedy or look at things that make you smile. Smelling a certain scent can often help. I know when I smell, when you open a citrus fruit like grapefruit or orange, you can smell the scent like across the room, and it uplifts the whole room. So have you got maybe some essential oils, or have you got fruit, especially citrus fruit that you can peel, or coffee, or even toast lifts me up. I don't eat toast, but if I smell toast, it livens my senses. And then cold exposure to water, splashing water on your face, or having a cold shower. I don't know if some of you are doing cold water immersion, but that's really good for your immune system. I've started doing that, and the benefits have been incredible. Is it easy? Hell no. But does it work, and is it worth it? Yeah, for sure. So these are just a few ideas. Which one stands out for you as something different? If any, pop that into the chat, or pop into the chat something that you use that's different to here. So what do you do to energize, to lift your energy? Or which one of these do you feel like you could use more of? Is it getting outdoors? Is it music? Is it finding a friend? Is it getting something to smell? Is it trying cold water? Thank you, Michael. Smelling a scent. Yeah, there's some beautiful essential oils that you can keep, and they last for, years actually. You can just have 2 or 3. doTERRA makes some lovely essential oils. Lively music, yeah. I've got so many playlists now for different states. Sometimes I use playlists to bring me down. Sometimes I use playlists to make me cry, because there's some music that take me back to memories when I feel like I need to cry and release emotion, but I can't. I use music for that, and lively music for sure, for sure. In fact, we're going to end the session with a song, which I'm hoping none of you have heard before, so it'll be new. But it's a lovely song that I think summarizes a lot of what we're speaking about. Okay, so sometimes we want to lift our energy. Sometimes, though, we want to anchor our energy. We want to come down, especially at the end of the day when we want to try and sleep. Or if you're feeling like I was earlier today, quite as if I was about to go into a state of hypervigilance, a bit too much like the suspicious squirrel. And I wanted to come more down into being a cool, calm, collected cat. So things that you can do when you're feeling hyper aroused or stressed and you want to feel calm and more grounded. You can literally lie on the ground. Or bring your awareness to your feet, touching the ground. Like, do that now. Notice where your feet are. Because when we become hyper energized and alert, we're very much in our heads. Like, think of the squirrel with the perked up ears and the wide open eyes. And you want to come down to your feet. Imagine maybe your feet having roots in the ground. And imagery can be very powerful for both ways to manage our state. So when I need to ground, I imagine myself as an elephant. You could maybe use a tree, or a strong mountain, or an anchor dropping down deeply into the ocean. And you can change your breath. Instead of fast and quick, shallow breaths, you breathe deeply, slowly, inhaling fully into your belly and exhaling over long periods of time. Maybe taking a warm bath. That can, especially if you add things like magnesium salt. So magnesium can also help because it helps the muscles to relax. And likewise, have you got a friend or a colleague that you can call and speak to that can soothe you? So I know there's some friends that I don't take their calls when I'm not in the right state because they don't have the energy match. It's not often that I'll ignore a call, but there are times that I do when I just choose that's a boundary. and I'll call them back another time because I know that they're going to be maybe too energetic, and I need to be soothed. Once again, the right kind of classical music or slow, deep music that helps to soothe you. Slow exercise as opposed to brisk exercise. Drinking something warm can often help to ground us. Spending time with animals or a pet. Once again, using scent, but this time maybe using things like lavender. So scent goes right past the prefrontal cortex to parts of the brain that tap into the amygdala, which is the emotional reactive part of the brain. And that's why smell can be so powerful. So for me, vanilla is very soothing. This candle smells of vanilla. And then also doing repetitive movements, tidying up, tidying shelves, maybe like doing gardening or doing doodling or knitting or crocheting. When you're feeling quite anxious and you're all over the show, coming down and doing one thing over and over again repetitively can also help to soothe, because that brings it taps into the parasympathetic nervous system or the vagus nerve. Which one of these appeals to you? Which one do you think you might want to try the next time you feel hyper aroused or stressed and you want to calm down? Another one that I explained at the beginning is the rattle and roll. So before I go to bed at night, to just shake for 60 seconds. I literally shake off any tension and then I get into bed, and that helps me to relax and feel heavy. So there's many different ideas. These are just a few that I wanted to share with you to remind you how powerful and easy it can be to change our state. So just like I mentioned, the hot air balloon needs to go up and sometimes it needs to come down. Have you got techniques? And you might have techniques in your head now, because now you've been listening and you're inspired. What happens tomorrow afternoon when you get a phone call about a leak in a property that you have? I know that that's happened to somebody recently. And at the same time, you've been called into a really difficult meeting and you just got a call from your IT person to say that your email might have been hacked. And somebody you care about has just been diagnosed with COVID. What happens then? When all of a sudden you notice yourself, even just saying those examples, I'm having emotion come up through me. I notice that I actually want to cry. So I'm starting to go into the collapse, like disconnect. You need to then have your ice. You need to have, thank you, Michael, for sharing ABC, your awareness, breathing, and core relax. That's when you need, like Michael has a technique, I know that. You need your in case of emergency techniques. So what I recommend is you print out or write down 2 or 3 things and put them somewhere. So I've actually published a blog. Is it published? I can't remember. I've written it. I must check that it's actually on my website. That's got these different techniques of how to lift your energy and drop them. And I recommend that you print that out, or print out the 2 or 3 that work for you, or the one. Like Michael, I know you have this one technique that helps you, and put it somewhere so that when you're in that emergency, in that state of panic or fight or flight, it's almost like when somebody hurts themselves, you go straight to the first aid kit and you've got that Band-Aid to then pull out and use. Because these things, being curious, being inspired, managing our energy, they take a lifetime, right, to get right. And along the way, we're going to have diversions and potholes and traffic jams. And so let's make it easy for ourselves and not assume that we're going to remember. Not assume that we're going to remember. So have these things somewhere that you know you can go to when you're feeling in that emergency state. And what's really important to put this into practice is to have boundaries. Now, as some of you know, my family, my parents are both from the region of Champagne in France. And to make champagne has to come from particular grapes that are grown in the Champagne region or connected to that region. And so the boundaries, the borders are very clear. If you use grapes that are made from other parts like Bourgogne or the Dordogne, then it's not a champagne. Even if it's made in the same way, it's a crémant. So if you want to stay effervescent, stay bubbly, stay well, you need to have boundaries. And that'll change. depending on your situation, depending on your window of threshold, depending on various different things. But boundaries are important, right? If we didn't have clear boundaries in sport like tennis, when would we know that the ball was out or in, or what kind of points to allocate? And so boundaries are about being clear about what's okay for you and what's not okay. That means it takes vulnerability and a sense of courage and braveness. And when we talk about boundaries and about caring for ourselves, it's also about knowing that we're enough and it's okay to not be okay and to express that. So Brené Brown expresses what wholeheartedness is and why boundaries are so important. And what I'd like to do is read something to you. And what I invite you to do is not to read it with me on the screen, but to rather lower your gaze down and listen to the words and allow them to soak into your body. If you feel comfortable and safe to close your eyes, you're welcome to close your eyes, but just lower your gaze so that you're not perhaps distracted, and listen to the words. Wholehearted living is about engaging in our lives from a place of worthiness. It means cultivating the courage, compassion, and connection to wake up in the morning and think, no matter what gets done and how much is left undone, I am enough. It's about going to bed at night thinking, yes, I am imperfect and vulnerable and sometimes afraid. But that doesn't change the truth that I am also brave and worthy of love and belonging. If your eyes are closed or gazing downward, gently lift them up to the screen. And that beautiful description of wholeheartedness comes from Brené Brown, who's a researcher in the area of wholeheartedness and creating boundaries. And caring for ourselves, having boundaries around what's okay and what's not okay, is also about accepting that we can't get to everything. There will always be unread emails and something to do. And that's why I asked, when you think of the question, what would you do if you only had 4 hours a day to work? What would get done? When you're feeling really tired and cynical and potentially ineffective, so close to burnout or in burnout, is to allow yourself to just do those things. And it's okay to go to bed at night and still have stuff that's undone, and to be able to let that go and be worthy of a good night's rest. Easier said than done? Well, like with anything, like playing a sport like tennis, the more we practice, the easier it gets. And it's not always easy. You know, we expect things to go in a certain linear way, but in reality, there'll be days where we'll get this all right, we'll feel amazing, we'll look after ourselves, we'll feel inspired and effective and curious, and we'll have loads of energy, and some days we won't. But over time, when we reflect on 6 weeks or a month at a time, if we can look back and notice, my window of tolerance, I've been more of a cool, calm, collected cat rather than the pausing panda that's completely tired, or the suspicious squirrel that's like hyper alert and too reactive, then we know that we're on the right path. And that means saying yes to things and no to other things. So the second last question that I'm going to ask you to think about are these. If you were to make a wish, so the picture that you're looking at comes from, let me show you this one. That's somebody making a wish at the Trevi Fountain in Rome, which I visited when I was 19 years old. But often when we see a well of water, we maybe throw a coin into make a wish. If you could make a wish and think about your ideal day, what would you do to feel inspired and curious and energized? Because often we go on holiday, right? Or on a weekend, we have the ideal day. And so we might go do some walking, we have lunch with a friend or with loved ones, we read a book on history, we sit at a cafe, or we go to new places, or we like to do so much exercise that we feel physically tired, or we like to just lie on the beach and do nothing. And then we come back from holiday, we get back to life, and we do everything that we love, and we stop doing everything that we love, and we don't make time for it. Now, I know we can't be on holiday every day, but are there aspects of what you would do on holiday that you could bring into not just your weekly routine, but your daily routine, like having a slightly longer lunch, or maybe reading something interesting, or listening to a piece of music? And that means saying yes to things. And so reflecting on, what do you need more of? What are you craving to bring into your life? When you have certain routines, or when you go places, or are there people that when you spend time in those places or with those people, you feel your energy go up? You feel your life force, your sense of aliveness, you increase. You feel like you're inspired. So how can you say yes to more of those things? And at the same time, we've got to sometimes think about saying no. Like I said, there's sometimes I won't answer the phone if I know that I'm not in the right state to manage a certain person, or I need to say no to doing something I love, like salsa dancing, because actually I don't need crowds and loud music, because I've been with lots of people and I've been on the road maybe for a long time. I need to rather ground and be home. And simply starting with thinking about these things is a great place to start. And so as we wrap up, I'd like to now ask you, what has inspired you in our time together? And please share in the chat. What has inspired you? Because we've covered quite a lot, right? We've spoken about the stress response and how it impacts the body. We've spoken about the window of tolerance, moving into different zones. We've spoken about different techniques to help us manage burnout. So using ICE, so going from ineffectiveness to being more inspired. We tried a breathing technique, moving from cynicism to being curious, how to better manage our energy and being aware of when it goes up and when it needs to come down, or when it goes down and it needs to come up. So what's inspired you? Oh, thank you, Lone. So reframing questions. Yeah, that's a powerful one. One I didn't share is I sometimes say to myself, isn't that interesting? That's one of my regular questions. When anything happens that's a bit stressful, I say to myself in my head, isn't that interesting? And that kind of helps me to reframe it. So what has inspired you? So Roxine's been inspired by the inhale and how that links to inspiration. Yeah, it's fascinating what happens in the brain. I didn't go into detail about it, but when you breathe in and you manage your breath, you allow for more whole brain integration. And you also get heart coherence, which helps you think more clearly and be more creative and better problem solving. And you tap into your intuition. So if that's the one thing that's inspired you, that's amazing. And a reminder to do grounding exercises. Yeah, I lie on the ground a lot more than I used to before COVID, I must say. Okay, what are you curious about? Anything that you're curious about. Might be the same thing that's inspired you. It might be something else. But what are you curious about as we say goodbye? And feel free to write that down or chat that. Okay, we've got somebody's curious about boundaries. Yeah, and boundaries, we shouldn't be too fixed on them. We need to be agile and flexible as things around us change. So it's good that you stay curious about that. And lastly, as Michael says goodbye, thank you. Have a great evening. Thank you for going to the trouble to be here, Michael. What action are you going to take from today? Maybe it's related to what's inspired you or what you're curious about. Maybe it's something completely different. But what action are you going to take and commit to? Saying yes. Saying yes or saying no can be hard. And both of them are full sentences. Yes, and so is no. And knowing when is a complete art form. So being curious about that is excellent. More grounding. Oh, Michael, you're still here. Amazing. Great. What action are you going to take? Anybody else want to make a public declaration by popping that into the chat? And as you share that, I really want to honor you. What's inspired me is having all of you on the call with me today. And I'm going to stop sharing because I want to end off with that song that I spoke about. So as you keep popping into the chat, because I'm going to keep my eye on that, what action are you going to take? And how? And here is a song that I'm going to play for the last 2 minutes. Oops, I went to the wrong Spotify list. I've got too many of them. Let me see. Oh, I'm going to do a quick search for it. Notice how your breath is, how I'm doing this. Why can't I find the search function? The song is called... I'm going to play... There we go. And now the sound's not working. Well, the song that I was going to share is Let It Breathe. I'm conscious about time, and if those of you need to leave, please do. I'm going to keep sharing, and I'd love to see you at the check-in, which will take place on Wednesday, the 1st of December at 3 o'clock, not 4 o'clock. So I'll send the Zoom link in the thank you note. Please come along and check in. I'd love to know how you're doing, and if you have any questions about the content that we've shared here today. Thank you everyone that was able to be here. Thank you. It was really good to spend the time with you. Thank you everybody.